A child immersed in silence, a house that had already forgotten what it means to be alive, and a new employee who never imagined what was about to happen. From the 20th floor of the Anderson Imperial Hotel, Matthew looked out over the city of Riverside as it stretched before him. Lights were beginning to dot the urban landscape as the sun set on the horizon. His eyes, however, didn't register the beauty of the moment. They were fixed on some arbitrary point, lost in thoughts that had consumed him for months. "Mr. Anderson, the meeting with the investors starts in 10 minutes. Melissa's voice, his executive secretary, brought him back to reality. Matthew adjusted his impeccable tie, smoothed his tailored suit, and turned to the woman with a brief nod. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Melissa hesitated at the door, a recent habit she had developed since the accident. Everyone around him seemed to walk on eggshells, measuring words, avoiding certain subjects. Matthew hated it, but he didn't have the energy to change the situation. "Any message from the housekeeper?" he asked, trying not to show anxiety. "Mrs. Nancy called an hour ago. She said Emma ate a little dinner today. She considered that progress." Matthew merely nodded. Progress. It was all he heard these days. Small and rare bits of progress that barely scratched the surface of the problem. His 6-year-old daughter hadn't spoken a word since the day she found Sarah unconscious at the foot of the stairs. The trauma had been too deep for such a small child. He descended in the private elevator to the meeting room. Inside, 10 men and women in formal attire waited expectantly for the president of the largest hotel chain in Southern California. The Anderson Empire, built by his father and expanded by him over the last 15 years, was synonymous with excellence and luxury. Matthew entered the room with the proud posture everyone knew, shoulders straight, chin slightly raised, penetrating gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's get down to business." For the next 2 hours, numbers, graphs, and projections dominated the conversation. Matthew conducted the meeting as he always did, with precision, objectivity, and a calculated coldness that impressed even the most experienced business people. No one there could imagine that behind that impeccable facade was a man shattered by grief. When the last investor left the room, Matthew remained seated, staring at the folder of documents in front of him. Melissa entered silently and placed an envelope on the desk. "The resumes of the candidates for the caregiver position as you requested." Matthew opened the envelope and quickly scanned the papers. He had asked the specialized agency to send only professionals with experience in cases similar to Emma's. Psychologists, therapists, educators, anyone qualified who could help his daughter overcome the trauma and start speaking again. "Schedule interviews with the first 3 for tomorrow. And your meeting in Los Angeles? Cancel it. This is the priority." Melissa couldn't hide her surprise. It was the first time in months that Matthew had altered his professional schedule for personal matters. With a nod, she left, leaving him alone with his thoughts again. The drive home took 40 minutes. Matthew drove his own car, a habit he maintained despite the protests of his head of security. It was one of the rare moments when he could be truly alone, without pitying looks or uncomfortable questions. The automatic gate of the Anderson mansion opened as he approached. The property, located in one of Riverside's most exclusive gated communities, was an imposing colonial-inspired construction with lush gardens that Sarah had personally planned. Every corner of that place carried memories of her. Matthew parked the car and entered through the side door, avoiding passing through the main hall. He didn't want to wake Emma if she was already sleeping. However, as he passed the corridor leading to the kitchen, he heard Mrs. Nancy's low voice. "Your father should be arriving soon, my angel. Don't you want to wait a little to say good night?" Matthew paused in the doorway. Sitting at the kitchen table, Emma was absently playing with her cloth doll. The girl didn't raise her eyes when he entered, continuing to methodically comb the wool hair of the doll she called Bella. "Good evening, Princess." Matthew approached slowly and placed a gentle kiss on top of his daughter's head. No reaction. "How was your day?" Silence. Mrs. Nancy, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the family since before Emma's birth, gave him a compassionate look. "She drew today." "Want to see?" The housekeeper opened a folder and showed the childish drawing. Simple lines representing a house, a small girl, and a doll. No other characters. Nothing of her father or absent mother. Matthew felt his heart tighten. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." He sat next to Emma and tried to take her hand. The girl didn't resist, But she didn't respond to the gesture either. Her eyes remained fixed on the doll. "Tomorrow we're going to meet some special people who will help you, okay? People who really like children and drawings." Emma showed no sign of having heard. After a few minutes trying to establish contact, Matthew sighed and stood up. "Shall I take her to bed, sir?" asked Mrs. Nancy. "No, I'll do it." Matthew carefully picked up his daughter. Emma allowed herself to be carried without protest, clinging to her doll. He climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the light weight of the girl against his chest. It was in these moments, when he held her in his arms, that reality hit him with greater force. He was alone in the mission of raising this fragile, traumatized child. Emma's room was spacious and decorated in pastel tones, with fairy and unicorn motifs that Sarah had personally chosen. The silk curtains swayed gently with the breeze that entered through the partially open window. Matthew placed his daughter on the bed and helped her put on her pajamas. Then, he sat on the edge of the mattress and began to read a story, as he did every night, even without getting any response. And so the princess discovered that the true magic was inside her all along. He closed the book and observed his daughter's delicate face. Emma had her mother's eyes, almond-shaped and expressive, though now they were always opaque, as if a fog covered them. Matthew adjusted the blanket around her small body and kissed her forehead. "Good night, my love. Daddy loves you very much." No response. Just the empty gaze and the soft breathing of the girl who, hugging her doll, was already beginning to fall asleep. Matthew remained there for a few minutes, gently stroking his daughter's hair, before getting up and leaving the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. The feeling of helplessness suffocated him. He who commanded hundreds of employees, who closed million-dollar deals with a simple nod, couldn't help his own daughter. The best specialists in Los Angeles had already tried, without success. Emma's selective mutism, they explained, was a response to severe trauma. Only time and a lot of therapeutic work could resolve it. Time. Matthew had no patience for that. He wanted results, wanted to hear his daughter's voice again, wanted to see her smile like before. He was willing to pay whatever necessary for that to happen. He went down to his study and poured himself a glass of whiskey. On the desk, the folder with the resumes of the candidates for the caregiver position awaited his more detailed analysis. Matthew opened it and began to carefully read each document. He needed someone competent, but also sensitive. Someone who understood childhood trauma, but who wouldn't turn his home into a clinic. Someone who followed rules and respected boundaries without questioning his paternal authority. One of the profiles caught his attention. Rachel Collins, 28 years old, graduated in educational psychology from UCLA, specialization in treating children with emotional trauma. 5 years of experience in a renowned clinic. Impeccable references. What intrigued him most, however, was the description of her work methodology. Child-centered approach respecting their time and space without pressure or excessive expectations. Gradual building of bonds through playful and expressive activities. Without pressure or expectations. It was the opposite of what Matthew applied in his professional life, but perhaps it was exactly what Emma needed at that moment. He took a sip of his drink and continued reading. Among the references there was an especially emphatic letter of recommendation written by the mother of a boy who had lost his father in a car accident and had gone 6 months without speaking. After working with Rachel, the child had not only returned to verbal communication, but showed clear signs of healthy grief processing. Matthew put Rachel's profile in a separate folder. Definitely, she would be the first to be interviewed. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Rachel Collins adjusted the skirt of her navy blue dress and took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell of the Anderson mansion. She knew from experience that first impressions were crucial, especially when dealing with wealthy and traditional families. Although her work focused on children, gaining the parents' trust was equally important. The imposing gate opened automatically after she identified herself through the intercom. Rachel walked along the stone path that cut through the front garden, observing the elegant architecture of the house. The information she had received about the Anderson family was scarce, but sufficient to understand the gravity of the situation. A 6-year-old girl traumatized by the loss of her mother, an emotionally distant father, and a completely destabilized family routine. Before she reached the main door, it opened, revealing a grey-haired woman with an erect posture. Good morning. I'm Rachel Collins. I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Anderson. Mrs. Nancy, housekeeper, please come in. Mr. Matthew is waiting for you in his office. Rachel followed the housekeeper through the interior of the mansion, noting the sophisticated details of the decoration. Paintings by renowned artists, exclusive designer furniture, carefully arranged art objects. Everything impeccable, organized, perfect. Perhaps too perfect. This is the first time Mr. Matthew has hired someone specifically to care for the girl, Mrs. Nancy commented as they walked. Since the accident, Emma has been under my care, but I'm not a specialist. She needs someone who understands what she's going through. There was genuine concern in the housekeeper's voice, which Rachel considered a good sign. At least one person in that house seemed truly interested in the child's emotional well-being. Is the girl at home now? Yes, in her room. She spends most of her time there playing alone with that cloth doll. She hardly goes out, not even to the garden. They arrived at a dark wooden door at the end of a corridor. Mrs. Nancy knocked softly, and after hearing a brief, "Come in," opened it for Rachel. The office was spacious, with bookshelves covering an entire wall. In the center, an imposing solid wood desk where Matthew Anderson sat, analyzing documents. He raised his eyes when Rachel entered and gestured for her to sit in the chair in front. "Thank you for coming, Miss Collins. I'm Matthew Anderson." Rachel immediately noticed the man's rigid posture, the penetrating gaze, the controlled way of speaking. Everything about him indicated self-control and emotional distance. He wore an impeccably cut suit, had perfectly combed hair, and an expression that revealed little or nothing of what was going on inside. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you for the opportunity." Matthew went straight to the point, as was his custom. He briefly explained Emma's situation, the specialists who had already tried to help her without success, and what he expected from the new caregiver. Someone who would establish healthy routines, encourage age-appropriate activities, and mainly help the girl overcome the trauma and return to verbal communication. "I'm not looking for miracles, Miss Collins, just consistent progress. I need my daughter to resume normal development for her age." Rachel listened attentively, perceiving what was behind those words. Matthew Anderson spoke of his daughter as he would of a business project, with clear objectives, expectations of results, and implicit deadlines. "Mr. Anderson, I understand your concern, but I need to clarify some points about my approach. I don't work with rigid goals or deadlines when it comes to emotional trauma in children. Each case is unique. Each child processes pain in their own way and at their own pace." She noticed a slight furrowing of his brows, but continued. "What I can guarantee is total dedication to Emma's well-being, respecting her rhythm, and creating a safe environment for her to gradually reconnect with the world around her. If I am hired, I will need your trust and mainly space to implement my methodology." Matthew stared at her for a few seconds, as if evaluating not only her words, but her firmness in pronouncing them. Few people dared to establish conditions in his presence. "Your references are excellent," he finally said. "Particularly the case of the boy Michael caught my attention." "Yes, I worked with him for 8 months. There are situations similar to Emma's, although each case is unique, as I mentioned." "And what were your specific strategies?" Rachel explained her methodology objectively. First, observation and slow building of bonds. Then, gradual introduction of expressive activities like drawing, music, and directed play. Finally, gentle stimuli to communication, always respecting the child's limits. "The most important thing, Mr. Anderson, is that Emma doesn't feel pressured to speak. Pressure will only increase her blockage. She needs to feel that she is accepted and loved exactly as she is, while receiving appropriate stimuli to express herself in alternative ways." Matthew asked a few more technical questions, which Rachel answered confidently. When the formal interview seemed to be over, he asked a question that wasn't on his script. "Do you have personal experience with loss, Miss Collins?" The question caught Rachel by surprise, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, I lost my father when I was 12. An aneurysm. It was sudden and devastating for my family." Matthew nodded, without asking for details. Something in that simple and direct answer seemed to satisfy him. "Would you like to meet Emma now?" The question was more of an invitation than a consultation. Matthew stood up and led Rachel through the mansion's corridors, until they reached a door decorated with the name Emma in colorful letters. "She usually doesn't react well to strangers," he warned in a low voice. "Don't be surprised if she completely ignores us." He knocked softly and opened the door. The room was spacious and well lit, decorated in soft tones. Sitting on the central carpet, Emma was silently playing with her cloth doll. She didn't raise her eyes when they entered. "Good morning, Princess," Matthew said, approaching cautiously. "I brought someone to meet you. This is Rachel." No reaction. The girl continued, focused on her play, as if she were alone in the room. Matthew gave Rachel a meaningful look, as if to say, "See?" Instead of forcing an approach, Rachel simply sat a few meters away from the girl, observing her with genuine interest. She noticed the delicate movements with which Emma adjusted the doll's dress, the way she whispered something inaudible to the toy. "Your friend is pretty," Rachel commented in a casual tone, without expecting a response. "Does she have a name?" Silence. Emma continued her play, but Rachel noticed a slightly quicker blink, indicating that the girl had heard. "You know, I also had a doll when I was little. Her name was Luna. She was my confidant. I told all my secrets to her." As she spoke, Rachel noticed a drawing on the floor near Emma. It was a simple house with flowers around it and a small figure beside it. "What a beautiful drawing. Did you make it?" No verbal response, but Emma slightly moved her eyes toward the drawing and then back to the doll. It was a subtle but significant sign for Rachel. Matthew, standing at the door, observed the interaction with a neutral expression. After a few minutes, he made a gesture indicating they should leave. Rachel got up calmly. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma. I hope we can play together soon." Back in the office, Matthew asked directly, "So what's your impression?" "Emma is an observant and sensitive girl. I noticed that although she doesn't respond verbally, she listens and registers what happens around her. The doll is clearly her transitional object, a connection to the sense of security she lost. The fact that she whispers to the doll is particularly interesting. It indicates that the ability to speak hasn't been lost, just redirected to a space she considers safe." Matthew listened attentively. For the first time since the beginning of the interview, Rachel noticed a slight change in his expression, perhaps a touch of hope. "How long do you think it will take until she speaks normally again?" "As I said before, I don't work with rigid deadlines, but I can develop an initial 6-week plan with weekly evaluations to adjust the approach as necessary." Matthew reflected for a few moments before making his decision. "The position is yours, Miss Collins. Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, certainly. Mrs. Nancy will show you the room we've prepared for you. I prefer that you live here during the week to establish a consistent routine with Emma. Weekends free unless there's an emergency." The terms were clear and direct, typical of a man accustomed to business negotiations. Rachel accepted, although she already foresaw the challenges of living under the same roof as that controlling man and his traumatized daughter. While Mrs. Nancy showed the house's facilities and explained the routines, Rachel observed every detail of the environment. Family photographs were scarce, as if they had been recently removed. In the few visual records she found, she noticed a beautiful dark-haired woman next to Matthew, certainly Sarah, Emma's mother. "The accident happened right here, on that staircase," Mrs. Nancy commented in a low voice, indicating the main staircase. "The girl was the one who found her. Since then, Emma avoids passing through here alone." Rachel nodded, better understanding the dimension of the trauma. It wasn't just the loss of her mother, but also the shock of finding her unconscious, the inability to help, the fear and confusion of a small child faced with something so devastating. And Mr. Anderson, how did he react? How would any man react who loses the love of his life so suddenly? He closed off, immersed himself in work. He tries to be present for Emma, but doesn't know how to handle the situation. The room assigned to Rachel was comfortable and well decorated, strategically located near Emma's. There was a desk, a small bookshelf, and an armchair by the window that offered a view of the backyard garden. "Here's the list of important contacts." Mrs. Nancy handed her a paper. "My number, Mr. Anderson's, his assistants, the family doctors. Mr. Anderson usually arrives late and leaves early, but is always available by cell phone in case of necessity." Rachel thanked her and, when she was alone, sat in the armchair to mentally organize her action plan. Emma's case was complex, but not impossible. The key would be to build a relationship of trust not only with the girl but also with the distant father who, behind the facade of coldness, hid his own unprocessed pain. That night, in her apartment in downtown Riverside, Rachel prepared her suitcase with practical and comfortable clothes, some carefully selected children's books, and materials for expressive activities. Before sleeping, she reviewed her notes on similar cases she had attended, seeking inspiration for the first days with Emma. The challenge was immense, but Rachel felt prepared. More than that, she felt strangely connected to that fragmented family, as if her encounter with the Andersons wasn't mere professional coincidence, but something predestined. Rachel's first weeks at the Anderson mansion were marked by observation and patience. Unlike other professionals who had been there, she didn't try to force interactions with Emma or establish rigid progress goals. Instead, she created a constant and non-invasive presence, allowing the girl to gradually get used to her company. Every morning, Rachel prepared Emma's room before she woke up. She left children's books strategically positioned, organized drawing materials in accessible places, and created small scenarios with toys that could spark the child's curiosity. Then, when Emma awoke, she limited herself to greeting her with a warm smile and continuing her own activities like reading a book or drawing. "Good morning, Emma. How about a special breakfast today?" Mrs. Nancy prepared pancakes with red berry sauce. As usual, Emma didn't respond verbally, but Rachel already identified small signs of recognition. A quick glance, a slight change in posture, the way the girl began to approach more when Rachel was present. On the fifth day, the first significant breakthrough occurred. Rachel was sitting on the room's carpet, leafing through a book about dragons and princesses, when she noticed that Emma, sitting a few meters away, was observing the illustrations with interest. "This princess reminds me of you," Rachel commented casually, showing the page where a dark-haired princess bravely faced a dragon. "She's small but very brave." To her surprise, Emma stood up, and still clutching her doll Bella, sat a little closer, allowing her to see the illustrations better. Rachel continued narrating the story, without making a fuss about that approach. When she finished, she simply left the book within the girl's reach and went to organize the art materials on a nearby table. Hours later, upon returning to the room with a snack, she found Emma leafing through the same book alone, showing the illustrations to her doll Bella. Small achievements like this followed in the subsequent days. Emma began to sit closer during readings, started to choose which book she wanted to hear, and on a particularly significant morning, accepted a crayon that Rachel offered her, drawing for the first time in the caregiver's presence. "What a beautiful drawing," Rachel praised, observing the colorful strokes on the paper. "Is it a garden?" Emma neither confirmed nor denied, but continued drawing, adding colorful flowers around a simple house. At night, when Matthew arrived, Rachel presented brief reports about the day's progress. The businessman listened attentively, although he maintained a certain emotional distance, as if he feared getting too involved. "She drew with me today," Rachel informed, 2 weeks after her arrival, "and she chose the book she wanted to hear at bedtime." "That's good," Matthew responded, unable to completely hide the relief in his voice. "But she still hasn't said anything?" "The speech will come when she's ready. The important thing is that Emma is beginning to express herself in other ways." Matthew nodded, without arguing. Despite his natural impatience, he was learning to trust Rachel's method, mainly because he was beginning to notice small changes in his daughter's behavior. Emma seemed more willing to leave her room, accepted sitting at the table for meals, and her drawings, previously monochromatic and repetitive, now presented more colors and details. One afternoon, while organizing some materials in Emma's room closet, Rachel found a photo album hidden under some boxes. She hesitated before opening it, respecting the family's privacy, but realized it could be a valuable tool to help Emma process her emotions. The album contained photos of Sarah with her daughter, moments in the park, birthdays, play in the pool. In all of them, the love between mother and daughter was evident. Rachel closed the album carefully and placed it on the table, without commenting. Hours later, when she returned to the room, she found Emma sitting, looking at the photographs with a solemn expression. The girl didn't push the album away when Rachel approached. "Your mother was very beautiful," Rachel commented softly, sitting next to Emma. "And you two look very happy in these photos." For the first time, Emma established prolonged eye contact with Rachel. Her eyes were teary, but there was no panic or despair in her expression, just a deep sadness and what seemed to be a silent question. It's okay to miss someone, Emma. And it's okay to cry when we miss someone we love very much. A tear ran down the girl's face. Rachel resisted the urge to wipe it or to hug Emma. Instead, she remained present and calm, offering silent support. To her surprise, it was Emma who approached, lightly resting her head on her arm. That moment marked a significant turning point. In the following days, Emma began to seek more physical proximity with Rachel. She sat beside her during readings, accepted help to comb her hair, allowed Rachel to hold her hand during walks in the garden. The doll Bella continued to be her inseparable companion, but now shared space with the caregiver's welcoming presence. "I noticed you really like flowers," Rachel commented during a walk in the garden. "Want to know the name of this one? It's a begonia. And that orange one is a marigold. They say it brings joy to the house." As she spoke, Rachel picked some flowers and gathered them into a small bouquet. Emma watched attentively, absorbing every word, every gesture. Upon returning inside the house, the girl firmly held Rachel's hand as they passed the staircase where the accident had happened, a clear sign that she was beginning to face her fears with the help of someone she trusted. At the beginning of the 4th week, Rachel decided to introduce a new activity. She brought to Emma's room a small box of children's musical instruments, a tambourine, colorful rattles, a recorder. "Music is another form of expression," she explained, while spreading the instruments on the carpet. "Sometimes when we can't say what we feel, we can play." To illustrate, she began to gently play a xylophone, creating a simple and cheerful melody. Emma observed for a few minutes before approaching and picking up a colorful rattle. With hesitant movements at first, she soon found a rhythm to accompany Rachel. That improvised music session became part of the daily routine. Emma showed special interest in the xylophone, quickly learning to create her own melodies. Rachel noticed that after these sessions, the girl seemed more relaxed and receptive to other activities. On a sunny morning, while playing in the garden, Rachel had an idea. Using flowers, dried leaves, small stones, and other natural elements, she created a kind of living picture on a large sheet of paper. "Look at what we can do with things we find in the garden. Want to try making your own?" Emma accepted the challenge with surprising enthusiasm. For more than an hour, she collected materials from the garden and carefully organized them on the paper, creating a composition that impressed Rachel for its creativity and aesthetic sense. "This deserves to be saved. Shall we photograph your artwork?" Rachel used her cell phone to record Emma's creation. When showing the photo to the girl, she noticed a small smile, the first she had seen on her face since arriving at that house. That night, when Matthew returned from work, Rachel awaited him with exciting news. "Emma smiled today," she announced, barely containing her own joy. "We were in the garden making art with natural elements, and she smiled when she saw the result." Matthew seemed momentarily disoriented, as if that information was difficult to process. "She smiled?" "Yes, it was brief but real, and look at what she created." Rachel showed the photo on her cell phone. Matthew observed for long seconds the colorful and harmonious composition created by his daughter. "She always liked the garden," he commented, with a slightly choked voice. "Sarah would take her to pick flowers every morning." It was the first time Matthew had spontaneously mentioned his deceased wife. Rachel respected that moment, allowing him to continue if he wished. "Sarah used to say Emma had her artistic sensitivity," Matthew continued, as if speaking more to himself than to Rachel. "I was always more practical. Numbers, strategies, results. Sarah was colors, textures, emotions." "Emma seems to have inherited that sensitivity," Rachel agreed softly. "And she's finding ways to express it even without words." Matthew nodded, still contemplating the photo. There was something different in his posture, a slight softening of his usual rigidity, perhaps. "May I see her collection of drawings?" The question caught Rachel by surprise. It was the first time Matthew had shown direct interest in his daughter's creations. "Of course, I've been keeping them all in a folder in her room." Together, they went up to Emma's room, who was already sleeping. At the desk, Rachel opened a colorful folder containing dozens of drawings produced in the last few weeks. Matthew examined them carefully, noting the clear evolution. The first ones were simple and monochromatic, while the more recent ones presented more details, colors, and elements. "This one is from today," Rachel explained, showing a particularly expressive drawing. "She made it after our activity in the garden." The drawing showed 3 figures in a colorful garden: a small girl, a young woman, and a tall man wearing what appeared to be a suit. Between the male and adult female figure, Emma had drawn a red heart. Matthew fixed his gaze on the drawing, unable to hide the emotion. Without saying anything, he carefully stored it in the folder and left the room, murmuring an almost inaudible thank you. That night, after retiring to his quarters, Matthew removed the drawing from the folder and examined it again alone. The implications of that simple and childish representation deeply disturbed him. Not only because Emma had portrayed Rachel as part of the family, but because, apparently, she saw some kind of effective connection between the caregiver and himself. The most unsettling, however, was realizing that the idea didn't seem absurd to him. In recent weeks, he had caught himself observing Rachel when she didn't notice. The dedication with which she cared for Emma, the unwavering patience, the way she had brought life back to that house. Matthew kept the drawing in his personal drawer, along with the watch that Sarah had given him on their last wedding anniversary, 2 objects that represented different times of his life, the past that still hurt, and a present that slowly and against all his expectations was beginning to offer small rays of hope. The Anderson mansion awoke agitated that Monday. Mrs. Nancy coordinated a small team of employees who cleaned, polished, and organized every corner of the property. In the gardens, gardeners pruned shrubs and planted new flowers in the flower beds. In the kitchen, the week's menu was reviewed with special attention. "What's happening?" asked Rachel while helping Emma choose an outfit for the day. "Mrs. Eleanor is arriving," replied Mrs. Nancy, with an expression that mixed respect and apprehension. "Mr. Anderson's mother. She lives in Miami but comes to Riverside a few times a year to visit the family." Rachel immediately perceived the tension that the name provoked. Even Emma, who was absently playing with her doll Bella, raised her eyes upon hearing mention of her grandmother. "She is demanding," Mrs. Nancy continued, carefully choosing her words. "She likes everything to be impeccable, especially when it comes to the family's image." The housekeeper didn't need to elaborate further. Rachel had worked with traditional families enough to understand what those words meant. Matriarchal figures like Mrs. Eleanor usually prioritized appearances, traditions, and control, especially when they felt threatened by changes. "Does she know about me?" Mr. Anderson informed her, of course, but Mrs. Eleanor likes to personally evaluate who lives with the family. Rachel nodded, maintaining a neutral expression while helping Emma comb her hair. Internally, however, she felt apprehensive. The weeks of progress with the girl had established a delicate and functional routine. Any abrupt change could represent a setback. "Let's choose a pretty dress for you, Emma. Grandma Eleanor is coming to visit you today." The girl showed no enthusiasm, but allowed Rachel to help her put on a navy blue dress with white details, clearly a piece chosen for special occasions. While arranging the girl's hair in a delicate braid, Rachel continued to speak in a soft tone. "Do you know what we can do today? We can show your grandmother that flower collage we made last week. I'm sure she'll love it." Matthew appeared at the door of the room, already dressed in an impeccable suit, more formal than his usual weekday attire. "Good morning," he greeted, trying to sound casual. "Is Emma ready? My mother should arrive in an hour." "We're almost finished," replied Rachel. "She looks especially beautiful today, don't you think?" Matthew observed his daughter for a few moments. Emma really did look different, not just because of the elegant dress and careful hairstyle, but because of something in her posture, a certain vivacity that had gradually returned in recent weeks. "Yes, she looks lovely," he agreed, allowing himself a slight smile. "Thank you for all of this." The gesture was brief, almost imperceptible. Matthew extended his hand and lightly touched Rachel's shoulder, a contact that lasted less than a second, but which carried a silent acknowledgement for the work she had been doing. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the moment. Matthew checked his watch, surprised. She arrived earlier, typical. Rachel noticed the immediate change in his posture. His shoulders became more erect, his jaw tense, his expression controlled. It was like watching someone put on an invisible armor. "Let's go, Emma. Grandma is eager to see you." The girl hesitated, clinging more firmly to her doll. Matthew noticed the resistance, But instead of insisting, as he would have weeks ago, he looked to Rachel for guidance. "Maybe we can come down in a few minutes," she suggested. "Give Mrs. Eleanor time to settle in first." Matthew nodded and left, gently closing the door behind him. Rachel turned to Emma, who showed clear signs of anxiety. "It's okay to be nervous, you know. Adults get nervous sometimes too. How about we breathe together before going down?" She guided Emma in a simple breathing exercise, something they had practiced in moments of greater agitation. The girl followed, imitating the slow movements of inhaling and exhaling. When she seemed calmer, Rachel extended her hand. "Ready to meet your grandmother? I'll be with you the whole time." To her surprise, Emma not only accepted her hand, but held it with unusual firmness. In the main living room, Mrs. Eleanor Anderson occupied an armchair, as if taking possession of a throne. She was a woman in her early 60s, elegantly dressed with perfectly arranged grey hair in a low bun. Her posture was erect, almost rigid, and her eyes, extremely similar to Matthew's, evaluated every detail of the environment. "Ah, finally," she commented upon seeing Emma and Rachel descend the stairs. "Come here, dear, let me see how you are." Emma hesitated, but with a slight encouragement from Rachel, approached her grandmother. Mrs. Eleanor examined her from head to toe, as if evaluating a work of art. "You've grown," she concluded, without showing much emotion. Her eyes shifted to Rachel. "And you must be the new caregiver." "Rachel Collins," she introduced herself, politely extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Eleanor." The matriarch accepted the greeting with a brief and formal handshake. "Matthew told me about your work with Emma. It seems we have some progress, finally." Before Rachel could respond, Matthew intervened. "Rachel has been doing exceptional work, Mother. Emma is becoming more expressive and participative every day." "But she still doesn't speak," observed Mrs. Eleanor, in a tone that sounded more like an accusation than concern. "The process of speech recovery is gradual," Rachel explained calmly. "Emma is communicating in many other significant ways." Mrs. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "In my day, we treated these things more practically. This generation tends to complicate simple problems with theories and alternative methods." The tension in the room was palpable. Matthew maintained a neutral expression, although Rachel could perceive his discomfort. Emma, sensing the heavy atmosphere, moved closer to Rachel, practically hiding behind her. "Why don't we go to the dining room?" suggested Matthew, trying to lighten the mood. "Mrs. Nancy has prepared a special lunch to celebrate your visit, Mother." During lunch, the conversation flowed superficially. Mrs. Eleanor talked about her social activities in Miami, the charity events she presided over, her recent trips to Europe. Matthew commented on business, new hotel projects, financial results. A polite but distant conversation, as if both carefully avoided touching on more personal subjects. Rachel remained discreet, focusing on helping Emma with the meal. The girl, normally calm during meals, appeared restless, moving the food around on her plate without much interest. "Emma was always such a well-behaved child at the table," commented Mrs. Eleanor, looking directly at Rachel. "Sarah raised her with much rigor regarding good manners." The name of Sarah hung over the table like a heavy cloud. Matthew visibly stiffened, and Emma completely stopped eating, clinging to the doll Bella she kept in her lap. "Emma is a bit tired today," Rachel intervened softly. "We had a busy morning with preparations for your arrival, Mrs. Eleanor." The matriarch gave her a penetrating look, as if evaluating not only her words, but her total presence in that house. "I understand. I imagine it must be challenging for an outsider to adapt to the dynamics of a family like ours." The comment, apparently innocent, carried a clear message. "You don't belong here." Rachel maintained her composure, limiting herself to smiling politely. After lunch, Matthew was called for an urgent video conference. He apologized and retired to his office, leaving Rachel and Emma in the company of Mrs. Eleanor. Exactly the scenario that Rachel feared. "I'll help Emma with her afternoon activities," she informed, preparing to go upstairs with the girl. "Oh, don't worry," interrupted Mrs. Eleanor with a calculated smile. "I'll stay with my granddaughter for a few hours. I have presents for her in my room and family stories to tell. You can take the opportunity to rest, dear." It wasn't a request, but a disguised order. Rachel looked at Emma, perceiving her discomfort, but also recognizing that she couldn't interfere in the relationship between grandmother and granddaughter. Is that okay, Emma? Do you want to spend some time with Grandma Eleanor? The girl didn't answer, but her gaze said everything. Rachel felt her heart tighten upon seeing the fear in the child's eyes. I'll be in my room if you need me, she said, mainly addressing Emma. Just call me, okay? Against her better professional judgment, Rachel had to step away. On her way to her room, she crossed paths with Mrs. Nancy, who gave her a compassionate look. Mrs. Eleanor has always been authoritarian, commented the housekeeper in a low voice, especially since Mr. Anderson became a widower. She thinks she needs to take control of the family. The following hours were distressing for Rachel. From her room, she could hear Mrs. Eleanor's voice, sometimes in a soft tone telling stories, sometimes in more incisive comments about behavior and family traditions. Occasionally, she heard the sound of Emma moving, but no verbal response. In the late afternoon, when Matthew finally concluded his meeting, Mrs. Eleanor called him for a private conversation in the office. Rachel took the opportunity to check on Emma, finding her sitting quietly in her room with a dejected expression. "Hi, little one, are you okay?" Emma raised her eyes, and Rachel immediately noticed that she had been crying. Without hesitation, she sat next to the girl and opened her arms. To her surprise, Emma practically threw herself into her embrace, the first such direct and spontaneous contact since she had started working in the house. "It's all right," she whispered, gently stroking the child's hair. "I'm here." In the office, the conversation between mother and son was taking unexpected turns. "We need to discuss Emma's future," announced Mrs. Eleanor without preamble. "I've been researching specialized schools that could help her better than any private caregiver." Matthew frowned, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "Schools? Emma barely manages to interact with close people, Mother. Besides, Rachel is doing an excellent job." "Matthew, be realistic," Mrs. Eleanor retorted firmly. "This situation is unsustainable in the long term. A young stranger living in your house, practically assuming the role of mother to your daughter. What will people think?" "I don't care what they think. I care about Emma's well-being." "So do I. That's exactly why I'm suggesting St. Michel's School in Switzerland. They have a renowned program for traumatized children with constant psychological monitoring and first-rate educational structure." Matthew was momentarily speechless. The idea of sending Emma to another country away from him seemed absurd. "That's out of the question." "I'm just asking that you consider it," insisted Mrs. Eleanor, softening her tone. "You have an empire to manage, Matthew. You can't dedicate the necessary time to Emma. And trusting the emotional development of your daughter to a temporary employee is not a solution." Without waiting for a response, she handed him an elegant institutional folder of the mentioned school. Matthew took it mechanically, still processing the suggestion. "Think carefully, son. I only want the best for both of you." The conversation was interrupted by knocks on the door. It was Rachel, with a serious expression. "Excuse me for interrupting, but I think you should come see Emma. She's quite upset." In the girls' room, they found her huddled in a corner, hugging her doll, with eyes red from crying. Matthew immediately knelt by her side. "What happened, Princess?" Emma didn't respond, but her eyes fixed on the folder that Matthew was still holding, the same one that Mrs. Eleanor had shown her earlier, explaining that it would be better for everyone if she went to study far away. In that instant, Matthew understood. He looked at his mother with an expression that mixed disbelief and irritation. "You talked to her about this, without consulting me first." Mrs. Eleanor remained impassive. "I just showed her the photographs of the school. Emma needs to gradually get used to the idea." "There is no idea she needs to get used to," Matthew retorted, standing up. "Emma is not going anywhere." The tense climate was temporarily appeased by Rachel, who suggested that everyone give Emma space to calm down. Matthew reluctantly agreed, but not before assuring his daughter that she would remain at home with him. Dinner that night was marked by forced conversations and long silences. Emma refused to come down, preferring to eat in her room in Rachel's company. Matthew, divided between irritation with his mother and concern for his daughter, barely touched his food. Later, when the house finally quieted down, Rachel was surprised by soft knocks on her door. It was Mrs. Eleanor, impeccably dressed, despite the late hour. "May we talk for a moment, Miss Collins?" The conversation that followed was polite, but loaded with insinuations. Mrs. Eleanor spoke about her concern for Emma's future, the need for permanent solutions instead of temporary arrangements, and, finally, got to the central point. I have excellent contacts, you know, influential families that are always looking for qualified professionals like you. Recently, I spoke with the Williamsons from Miami. They need someone with your profile for the institution they maintain. Exceptional salary, housing included, possibility of professional growth. The offer was clear, an elegant path for Rachel to move away from the Anderson family. It wasn't a dismissal, but a golden exile. I appreciate your consideration, Mrs. Eleanor, but I am committed to Emma's case at this moment. I sincerely believe we are making significant progress. The matriarch smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, I understand. Just consider that temporary situations can create unrealistic expectations, both for the child and for other people involved. Rachel maintained a neutral expression, although she perfectly understood the subliminal message. Mrs. Eleanor had noticed the closeness between her and Matthew, and more importantly, she considered it a threat. My only commitment is to Emma's well-being, she responded simply. Naturally, and that's exactly why we should all consider what's best for her in the long term. Good night, Miss Collins. Mrs. Eleanor left, leaving behind an aroma of expensive perfume and veiled threats. In the corridor, she didn't notice the small figure of Emma, who had silently left her room and heard part of the conversation. When Rachel opened the door to check if she was really alone, she found Emma standing there, with wide and frightened eyes. Without saying anything, she just extended her arms. Rachel took her back to her room, feeling that the progress of the last few weeks was suddenly threatened by the arrival of that imposing and controlling figure. That night, Emma slept clinging not only to her doll Bella, but also firmly holding Rachel's hand, as if she feared she might disappear at any moment. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The days following Mrs. Eleanor's arrival were marked by a silent tension that hung over the Anderson mansion. The matriarch had settled in the main guest room, announcing that she would remain as long as necessary to organize things. Matthew, divided between filial respect and concern for Emma, spent more time in his office, as if avoiding direct confrontations. Rachel noticed the subtle changes in the house routine. Meals, previously quiet moments of small family interactions, became formal and tense events. The music and art sessions with Emma were frequently interrupted by Mrs. Eleanor, who insisted on incorporating etiquette and posture lessons in what she called educational compliment. "A lady of society needs more than colorful scribbles," she commented one afternoon while observing Emma drawing. "She needs to know how to behave, speak correctly, represent her family name." The irony of the observation, criticizing the lack of proper speech in a child who didn't speak, wasn't lost on Rachel, who needed all her self-control to not respond. Instead, she continued encouraging Emma to express herself through art, praising her creations, maintaining the safe space she had carefully built in the previous weeks. On the morning of the 5th day, Rachel found Emma in the library, absently leafing through a large book of children's tales. It wasn't just any book. It was an old copy, with a worked leather cover and delicate illustrations. "What a beautiful book," she commented, sitting next to the girl. Emma ran her fingers over a handwritten inscription on the first page. "For my little Emma, may each story here be a window to new worlds. With love, Mom." "It was a gift from your mother," Rachel observed softly. "Did you read together?" The girl nodded slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture, but significant. It was the first time she had directly responded to a question, even if non-verbally. Rachel felt a wave of emotion, but kept her voice calm. "Would you like us to read together now?" Another small nod. Rachel began to read the story chosen by Emma, a tale about a princess who had lost her voice and needed to find it in the enchanted forest. The symbolism didn't go unnoticed. While turning a page, an envelope fell from the book. It was a simple white envelope with the name Matthew written in an elegant handwriting. Rachel picked it up, hesitant. By the appearance and the place where it was kept, it seemed to be something personal, possibly a letter from Sarah. "This seems important," she said, showing the envelope to Emma. "I think we should save it, to give to your father later." The girl looked at the envelope for a few moments, then turned her attention back to the book, apparently uninterested. Rachel put the envelope in the pocket of her apron. intending to give it to Matthew as soon as possible. However, the day proved more hectic than expected. Mrs. Eleanor had organized a meeting with the family lawyer, and Matthew spent the entire morning locked in his office. During lunch, the matriarch announced her plans for the afternoon. "I've invited some friends for tea, old acquaintances from Riverside who are eager to see how Emma is growing." The announcement caught everyone by surprise. Matthew frowned. "Mother, I don't think that's a good idea. Emma is still not comfortable with strangers." "Nonsense," Mrs. Eleanor retorted with a dismissive gesture. "They're practically family. Besides, it's time for Emma to resume contact with the appropriate social circle. Too much isolation isn't healthy." "Emma is not isolated," Rachel intervened, unable to contain herself. "She's in a therapeutic process that respects her rhythm and needs." Mrs. Eleanor gave her an icy look. "I appreciate your professional opinion, Miss Collins, but as a grandmother, I believe I know what's best for my granddaughter." Matthew, perceiving the growing tension, tried a conciliatory solution. "Perhaps we can limit the meeting to just a few minutes, and only if Emma shows interest in participating." Mrs. Eleanor apparently yielded, although her smile indicated that she considered the battle far from over. At 3 p.m, the living room was prepared for tea, refined sweets, imported porcelain, elegant floral arrangements, everything organized according to Mrs. Eleanor's precise instructions. Rachel helped Emma dress appropriately, trying to prepare her for the event. "It will just be a few ladies who are friends of your grandmother," she explained gently. "You don't need to talk to them if you don't want to. You can just observe, and if you feel uncomfortable, we can go back upstairs, okay?" Emma firmly held Rachel's hand as they descended the stairs. In the room, 4 elegantly dressed ladies were conversing with Mrs. Eleanor. The girl's arrival provoked exclamations of admiration. "Look how much she's grown. She's the spitting image of her mother, don't you think? Dear, do you remember Aunt Betty? I gave you a French doll on your 4th birthday." Emma visibly shrank before the avalanche of attention. Rachel felt the small hand squeeze hers more tightly. "Perhaps it's better to give Emma a little space to get used to things," she suggested, trying to create a comfort zone for the girl. "She's perfectly fine," declared Mrs. Eleanor, practically pulling Emma to the center of the group. "Come, dear, show how much you've grown. Aunt Betty brought a present for you." What followed was an uncomfortable session of unanswered questions, comments about the girl's speech problem, and the ladies' theories on how to cure mutism. Emma, visibly distressed, kept her eyes fixed on the floor, clinging to her doll Bella. "In my day, a child who didn't speak got a scare," commented one of the ladies, laughing as if telling a harmless anecdote. "It worked immediately." "Outdated methods aside," interrupted Mrs. Eleanor, "we're considering a specialized school in Switzerland. The Williamsons sent their youngest son there after the divorce, and he returned completely recovered." The ladies murmured in approval, discussing the merits of European institutions and the need for structured discipline. Rachel observed Emma attentively, noting the growing signs of discomfort, the faster breathing, the tense body, the teary eyes. When the girl began to tremble slightly, she decided to intervene. "I think Emma is a bit tired," she said, approaching. "Perhaps it's better for her to rest a bit before dinner." "She just arrived," protested Mrs. Eleanor. "Besides, she needs to learn to live in society." At that moment, Emma dropped her doll Bella, which fell at the feet of one of the ladies. When the woman bent down to pick it up, she made a comment that triggered chaos. "What an old and worn doll. We need to get you a new one, dear. This one looks ready for the trash." It was as if a switch had been flipped. Emma snatched the doll from the lady's hands with surprising force, and her eyes, usually apathetic, flashed with fury. Without warning, she knocked over the center table, scattering cups and sweets across the Persian rug. The shock was general. The ladies rose, startled, while Mrs. Eleanor became livid with embarrassment. "Matthew," she called loudly, "come here right now." Rachel had already knelt beside Emma, who was now silently sobbing, clinging to her doll. "It's all right," she whispered. "Let's get out of here." Without waiting for authorization, she picked Emma up and headed for the stairs. Matthew, alarmed by the shouts, met them halfway. "What happened?" "Your daughter had a breakdown," announced Mrs. Eleanor, who had followed them. "It's the result of this permissive method. She needs structure, discipline, clear limits." Matthew looked at Emma, crying in Rachel's arms. then at the room where the guests were commenting in low voices on the incident, and finally at his mother, whose expression mixed indignation and a strange air of triumph, as if the episode confirmed her theories. "Take care of her," he said to Rachel, ignoring his mother's protests. "I'll be upstairs as soon as I resolve this here." In the room, Rachel helped Emma calm down, using the breathing techniques they had practiced. Gradually, the sobs ceased, although the girl continued to cling to the doll as if her life depended on it. "Bella is very important to you, isn't she?" she asked softly. "Does she remind you of Mom?" Emma didn't respond verbally, but her eyes confirmed the assumption. Rachel suddenly remembered the envelope found earlier in the book. Perhaps there was something there that could help in this difficult moment. "I found something today that I think belonged to your mother," she said, removing the envelope from her pocket. "We should save it for your father, but maybe you want to see it too." Emma looked at the envelope with curiosity. Rachel hesitated. This was clearly something personal addressed to Matthew. On the other hand, it was possibly one of the few tangible connections that remained between Emma and her mother. Carefully, she opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated a few days before the accident. Rachel silently read the first lines and felt a tightness in her heart. It was indeed a letter from Sarah to Matthew, intimate words, personal reflections, plans for the family's future. "It's a letter from your mother to your father," she explained to Emma. "Something very special and private. Let's save it for him, okay?" But as she prepared to put the letter back in the envelope, a paragraph at the end caught her attention. "Matthew, if something happens to me, and I know you hate when I talk like this, but I need to say it, don't close yourself off to life. Emma needs joy, lightness, love, and so do you. If one day you find someone capable of bringing light back to our home, someone who loves Emma as she deserves, don't let the past or guilt prevent you from moving forward. I want you both to be happy, with or without me." Rachel quickly folded the letter, feeling like an intruder in something deeply intimate. Those words, written by a woman who had somehow sensed her fate, carried an immense emotional weight. It wasn't her role to share or interpret them. "Let's save this for your father, okay?" she said to Emma, putting the letter back in the envelope. "It's something he'll want to read carefully." She put the envelope in the drawer of the bedside table, deciding to give it to Matthew when they were alone, away from Mrs. Eleanor's watchful eyes. The consequences of the tea incident were felt at dinner. Mrs. Eleanor, recovered from the initial shock, was now determined to prove her point. "Today's behavior only confirms my concern," she declared, while methodically cutting a piece of chicken. "Emma needs a more structured approach than we can offer here." Matthew, who had spent the last hour on the phone apologizing to the guests, looked exhausted. "We're not going to discuss this now, Mother. On the contrary, this is exactly the moment to discuss it," insisted Mrs. Eleanor. "I've already initiated contacts with the school in Switzerland. They have a spot for the next quarter." Rachel, who had come down to get some tea for Emma, stopped at the dining room door, surprised by the revelation. "You did what?" Matthew asked, equally shocked. "I took the initiative that you hesitate to take," Mrs. Eleanor responded with studied calm. "As a grandmother, I have the right and duty to intervene when I perceive that the decisions being made are not the best for my granddaughter." "You don't have the right to make decisions about Emma's education without consulting me," Matthew retorted, raising his voice for the first time. "I didn't make decisions, I merely explored options. The final word is yours, naturally." The condescending tone only increased Matthew's irritation. "There are no options to explore. Emma stays in Riverside with me." "With you?" questioned Mrs. Eleanor with a dry laugh. "You barely spend 2 hours a day with her. Who is really raising your daughter is that professional you hired." The contempt in her voice when referring to Rachel was evident. Matthew pushed his plate, completely losing his appetite. "Rachel has been exactly what Emma needs at this moment. For the first time in months, I see my daughter reacting, expressing herself, trusting someone. I'm not going to interrupt that progress because of concerns about social appearances." Mrs. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, partially abandoning the mask of courtesy. "It's not just about appearances, Matthew. It's about Emma's future and the integrity of this family. Don't you see how this situation appears in everyone's eyes? A young widower, a beautiful caregiver living under the same roof. People talk." "I don't care about talk," Matthew declared firmly. "You should care. The Anderson name means something in this city. You have responsibilities that go beyond your personal feelings. Rachel silently retreated, without revealing her presence. The conversation was taking turns that didn't concern her, although it was evident that she was at the center of it. She returned to Emma's room, finding the girl asleep, exhausted by the tumultuous day. She made her more comfortable in bed, adjusting the blanket around her, touched by the fragility and at the same time by the strength of that child who faced such profound losses and changes. Sarah's letter weighed on her thoughts. Those words seemed to have crossed time to create a connection between past and present, between the woman who had departed and the people who remained. Rachel couldn't ignore the fact that her presence in that house had somehow responded to Sarah's final wish, to bring light back to Matthew and Emma. But now, with Mrs. Eleanor's arrival and her maneuvers to distance Emma, everything seemed threatened. And to complicate matters further, Rachel couldn't deny that her feelings for that family had surpassed the professional boundary. She cared deeply for Emma, and as for Matthew, her thoughts were interrupted by soft knocks on the door. It was Matthew, looking exhausted but determined. "How is she?" "Sleeping. It was a difficult day." He nodded, observing his daughter for a few moments before turning to Rachel. "We need to talk. Not here." They went to a small office adjacent to Emma's room, a space that Matthew rarely used, but that offered privacy. "My mother is determined to send Emma abroad," he began without preamble. "She's doing more than just suggesting. Apparently, she's already spoken with lawyers about the possibility of requesting temporary guardianship, alleging my emotional incapacity to properly care for Emma." Rachel felt a chill. "Can she do that?" "Legally, it's complicated, but my mother has influence and resources, and more importantly, she knows my weak points." There was a rare vulnerability in his voice, the controlled and confident man giving way to the concerned father, the son divided between respect for the matriarch and protection for his own daughter. "Matthew, I think you should see this," said Rachel, suddenly remembering the letter. She briefly explained how she had found it in the storybook. As he silently read Sarah's words, Rachel observed the emotions crossing his face. Surprise, pain, nostalgia, and finally, something close to peace. "She was always like this," he murmured, carefully folding the paper. "Practical, foreseeing." Even in the end, there was a moment of loaded silence where the past and present seemed to meet. "You have been exactly what Sarah would wish for Emma," Matthew finally said, raising his eyes to Rachel. "Someone who brings lightness, who respects her rhythm, who makes her feel safe again." The words hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. Rachel felt her heart accelerate, aware that they were at a decisive moment. "My commitment is to Emma," she responded with sincerity. "Seeing her progress, even small, even slow, has been the greatest reward." Matthew took a step in her direction, diminishing the physical and emotional distance they had maintained until then. "And what about me?" he asked in a low voice. "I've also noticed changes in myself since your arrival. The house doesn't seem so empty. The memories don't hurt as much." Rachel felt simultaneously vulnerable and strengthened by the honesty of that moment. "Matthew, A sharp scream interrupted what she would say. It came from Emma's room. Both immediately ran, finding the girl sitting in bed, pale and trembling, clearly waking from a nightmare. "We're here, Princess." Matthew knelt beside the bed, holding his daughter's hand. Emma looked at her father, then at Rachel, her small body still shaking with silent sobs. She was burning with fever. The night that followed was long and tense. Mrs. Eleanor, alerted by the commotion, appeared in the room still in robe and nightgown, offering unsolicited opinions about the cause of the fever. Probably all this unnecessary emotional agitation. Rachel remained by Emma's side, changing cold compresses on her forehead, offering water in small sips, singing softly while the girl oscillated between restless sleep and moments of frightened wakefulness. Matthew, after calling the family doctor who prescribed antipyretics over the phone, divided himself between his daughter's room and attempts to calm his mother, who insisted that the situation only proved her thesis about the need for more adequate professional care. Around 3 in the morning, when the fever finally began to subside, Rachel was exhausted but determined not to leave Emma's side. Matthew silently entered the room, bringing a cup of tea. "You should rest a bit," he suggested, handing her the hot drink. "I can stay with her now." "I'm fine," Rachel replied, thanking him with a tired smile. I prefer to stay until I'm sure the fever won't return. Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, observing his daughter's sleeping face. The dark curls were damp with sweat, the cheeks still slightly flushed from the recent fever. She looks so much like her mother, he commented in a low voice. Not just physically. She has the same determination, the same sensitivity. Rachel nodded, understanding the weight of that observation. Sarah was present in that house, not only in the photographs or in the newly discovered letter, but in the features, gestures, and spirit of Emma. At that moment, as if she sensed they were talking about her, Emma opened her eyes. She looked at her father, then at Rachel, and then did something extraordinary. Her lips moved, forming a single word, pronounced in an almost inaudible whisper. Rachel. The name, spoken for the first time in months, hung in the air like a blessing, a miracle, a promise. Matthew was paralyzed while Rachel felt involuntary tears fill her eyes. "I'm here," she responded, holding Emma's hand. "I'm right here." The girl went back to sleep, but something fundamental had changed in that house. A barrier had been broken, a path opened, a possibility created, and none of them would be the same after that night. The morning brought a momentary calm to the Anderson mansion. Emma slept deeply, recovering from the night fever. Matthew had cancelled all his commitments for the day, something unthinkable weeks ago. Mrs. Eleanor, surprisingly, remained discreet in her quarters, perhaps planning her next moves. Rachel, exhausted after the night of vigil, allowed herself a brief rest in her room. She couldn't stop thinking about the word whispered by Emma. Her name, the girl's first verbal manifestation in months. That small miracle reaffirmed her conviction that they were on the right path, despite the recent obstacles. Around 10 in the morning, soft knocks on her door awakened her from the light nap. It was Mrs. Nancy with a worried expression. "Miss Rachel, excuse me for bothering you, but I think you should know, Mrs. Eleanor is meeting with Dr. Mitchell in the office." "Dr. Mitchell?" "The family lawyer. They've been reviewing documents for more than an hour." The information fell like a weight in Rachel's stomach. Mrs. Eleanor's intentions to obtain temporary guardianship of Emma seemed to be advancing more quickly than they had imagined. "Does Mr. Anderson know about this?" "He's with Emma in her room. I don't think he noticed the lawyer's arrival." "Thank you, Mrs. Nancy. I'll check how Emma is doing." In the hallway, Rachel encountered Matthew leaving his daughter's room, looking more rested than in the last few weeks despite the difficult night. "She's still sleeping," he informed in a low voice. "The fever hasn't returned." "Matthew, your mother is meeting with the family lawyer at this moment." The news instantly erased the brief moment of tranquility from his face. "I had hoped she would reconsider after what happened last night." Emma spoke, Rachel. "That should mean something." "It means a lot," Rachel agreed. "It's an extraordinary advance. But I think your mother sees the situation differently. For her, perhaps it's just another sign that Emma needs professional structure, as she says." Matthew ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of visible frustration. "I need to stop this now. I won't allow them to make decisions about my daughter without my consent." Before he could head to the office, however, Emma's bedroom door opened. The girl was standing in the doorway, still in pajamas, clutching her inseparable doll Bella, but with eyes more alert than they had seen in a long time. "Good morning, Princess." Matthew knelt to be at his daughter's height. "How are you feeling?" Emma didn't respond verbally, but her eyes moved from Matthew to Rachel and then to the corridor that led to the main staircase. It was as if she perceived the tension in the air, the unusual movement in the house. "Everything's fine," Rachel assured, also approaching. "Would you like some breakfast? Mrs. Nancy made those pancakes you like." The girl shook her head negatively, something rare. Usually she limited herself to ignoring questions she didn't want to answer. Her active refusal was, paradoxically, another small sign of progress in her communication. "What do you want to do, then?" asked Matthew, genuinely interested in his daughter's preference. Emma hesitated for a moment, then held Rachel's hand and pulled her back into the room. There she went to her activity table and pointed to the drawing materials. "You want to draw now?" confirmed Rachel, surprised by the initiative. An affirmative nod. Matthew and Rachel exchanged hopeful looks while Emma sat down and began to select colored pencils with unusual determination. "I'll stay with her," Rachel offered. "You need to resolve that situation." Matthew nodded, kissed the top of Emma's head, and left with determined steps toward the office. Rachel sat next to the girl, observing with interest as she drew with intense concentration. The drawing that gradually emerged was different from the previous ones. More detailed, more expressive, it showed three figures, a small girl holding hands with a man and a woman. Above them, a fourth figure hovered like an angel, with long, dark hair, clearly a representation of Sarah. "It's a beautiful drawing," Rachel commented softly. "Is that you with your father and me?" Emma nodded, adding more details: flowers around the figures, a bright sun in the corner of the paper, and what appeared to be the Anderson mansion in the background. It was an image of family, not the one that had been, but the one that could be. Rachel felt a lump in her throat at that so clear representation of the child's desires. In the office, the conversation between Matthew and his mother was far from friendly. The lawyer, Dr. Mitchell, a middle-aged man accustomed to the dynamics of the Anderson family, remained diplomatically neutral. "This is completely unacceptable," declared Matthew, after discovering that his mother had initiated the process to request temporary guardianship of Emma. "There is no legal basis for this." "There are sufficient grounds, son," Mrs. Eleanor retorted with studied calm. "Your dedication to business, though admirable, leaves little time for the proper raising of a traumatized child. The very existence of that caregiver you hired is proof that you recognize you cannot be present as Emma needs. I hired Rachel precisely because I recognize Emma's specific needs and sought specialized help. That demonstrates responsibility, not negligence." Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat, intervening for the first time. "If I may make a technical observation, the case is delicate. On one hand, there is no evidence of negligence that would justify a drastic judicial intervention. On the other, Mrs. Eleanor, as grandmother, has legitimacy to express concern for her granddaughter's well-being." "And what is your recommendation, then?" asked Matthew, trying to maintain his composure. "Sincerely, a family agreement. Custody disputes are wearing for all involved, especially for the child. And in Emma's case, with the history of trauma and the current psychological condition, the additional stress could be harmful." Mrs. Eleanor smiled, as if that suggestion favored her plans. "Exactly what I've been proposing from the beginning, a structured arrangement, with Emma receiving the appropriate education and treatment in a specialized institution, while maintaining regular contact with the family." Matthew felt his blood boil at the evident manipulation in his mother's words. "That's not an agreement, it's a surrender. Emma doesn't need any institution. She is progressing here, at home, with people who love and respect her process." "People? Or person?" questioned Mrs. Eleanor with malicious emphasis. "Because it seems to me that you've placed all your hopes in this young woman you've known for a few months. Rachel is a competent professional who has earned Emma's trust. You yourself heard. My daughter spoke for the first time in months last night. She called for Rachel, not for me, not for you, not for an institution in Switzerland." The mention of that significant moment seemed to catch Mrs. Eleanor by surprise. She exchanged a quick look with the lawyer, who raised his eyebrows. "Emma spoke?" asked Dr. Mitchell, clearly interested in this new information. "Yes, during the night, when she had a fever. She pronounced Rachel's name. It was her first word since the accident." The lawyer made some notes, and Matthew realized that this fact could change the dynamics of the legal situation. If Emma was demonstrating concrete progress under current care, it would be more difficult to argue the need for a drastic change. "That is significant," admitted Dr. Mitchell. "Mrs. Eleanor, considering this new information, perhaps we should reassess the urgency of the measures discussed." The matriarch didn't seem satisfied with the change in tone, but she was too experienced to openly demonstrate her displeasure. "A single episode doesn't establish a pattern," she argued. "Besides, there are other considerations besides the ability to speak. Emma's formal education is practically paralyzed, her socialization is non-existent, and the current domestic situation raises questions about long-term stability." "What domestic situation?" questioned Matthew, although he already knew exactly what his mother was referring to. "Matthew, let's be frank," Mrs. Eleanor partially abandoned diplomacy. "Your relationship with this young woman exceeds the professional. It's visible to anyone with eyes. And while I understand your loneliness, mixing personal matters with Emma's care can create a confusing and potentially harmful environment for the child." The silence that followed was dense. Matthew knew that his mother had touched on a sensitive point. His feelings for Rachel, which he himself had not yet completely processed or admitted. "My relationship with Rachel is not under discussion here," he finally responded. "Emma's well-being is the only priority, and all evidence indicates that she is improving under current care." The meeting continued for a few more minutes, with the lawyer suggesting a more gradual approach. Periodic evaluations by independent specialists, progress reports, possibility of partial integration into educational activities when Emma was ready. No definitive decision was made, but Matthew left the office with the feeling that he had, at least temporarily, prevented his mother's more drastic plans. Upon returning to Emma's room, he found a scene that warmed his heart. Rachel and his daughter sitting on the floor, surrounded by colorful drawings, talking in low voices, or rather, Rachel was speaking, and Emma was responding with gestures, expressions, and occasional nods. "Look who's here," said Rachel upon noticing his presence. "Want to show Daddy what you drew?" Emma proudly raised the drawing of the three figures, herself, Matthew, and Rachel, with Sarah as a protective angel above. Matthew felt a lump in his throat as he understood the meaning of that so clear representation. "It's beautiful, Princess," he managed to say, kneeling beside his daughter. The morning passed in relative peace. Emma, still convalescent from the night fever, but visibly more animated, spent hours drawing, playing with puzzles, and, to Rachel's delight, leafing through books with renewed interest. Matthew divided his time between his daughter's room and some unavoidable work calls, while Mrs. Eleanor remained strategically distant, probably recalculating her approach after the impasse in the office. Around noon, when Mrs. Nancy came to announce that lunch was served, Emma surprised everyone again. Instead of having her meal in the room, as she had been preferring since her grandmother's arrival, she indicated that she wanted to go down to the dining room. "Are you sure?" asked Rachel, surprised by the initiative. The girl nodded firmly, taking Rachel's hand with one hand and Matthew's with the other, practically pulling them out of the room. In the dining room, Mrs. Eleanor was already seated in her usual place, reviewing some correspondence. She raised her eyes, surprised to see Emma entering hand in hand with Matthew and Rachel. "Look who decided to honor us with her presence," she commented, in a tone that tried to be affectionate but sounded slightly forced. "Are you feeling better, dear?" Emma didn't respond directly, but released the adult's hands and walked decidedly to her place at the table. She sat erect, placed the napkin in her lap with surprising formality, and looked expectantly at the others, as if saying, "Let's begin." Matthew and Rachel exchanged surprised looks before taking their places. Throughout the meal, Emma remained attentive, observing the interaction between the adults, occasionally participating in her own way, pointing to something she wanted, nodding in agreement or disagreement when asked. "I noticed you rearranged some furniture in Emma's room," commented Mrs. Eleanor, addressing Rachel in a superficially cordial tone. "The original decoration was chosen by professional decorators. We only made small adjustments to facilitate therapeutic activities," Rachel responded calmly. "The space needs to be functional for Emma's current needs." "Of course, I understand. Although I believe stability and continuity are important for children in trauma situations." The jab was subtle but clear. Matthew intervened. "The changes were minimal and approved by me, Mother. Besides, Emma participated in the decisions, which is therapeutically valuable." The meal proceeded with this kind of polite tension until suddenly Emma did something unexpected. She picked up her juice glass, raised it slightly, and looked at the adults around the table. It was a silent toast, a gesture clearly imitated from previous social occasions. Matthew, immediately understanding, raised his own glass. "To my princess's health," he said with a choked voice. Rachel followed the example, and even Mrs. Eleanor, after a moment of hesitation, raised her water glass. It was an almost surreal moment, a family divided by profound conflicts, momentarily united by the spontaneous gesture of a child who, until the night before, had not pronounced a single word in months. After lunch, Matthew had to attend an urgent video conference. Mrs. Eleanor retired to her room, claiming she needed to rest. Rachel and Emma returned to the girls' room, where they continued with calm activities suitable for her still convalescent state. The day passed without new confrontations, although the underlying tension remained palpable in the mansion. At night, when Emma finally fell asleep after an emotionally intense day, Rachel retired to her own room, physically exhausted, but mentally alert. She knew she needed to make a decision. The situation in the Anderson house had become unsustainable. Mrs. Eleanor's presence and her maneuvers to obtain guardianship of Emma created a toxic environment that could compromise the girl's progress. Additionally, the insinuations about her relationship with Matthew, insinuations that Rachel reluctantly admitted to herself were not completely unfounded, further complicated the scenario. After hours of reflection, she came to a painful conclusion. She needed to step away. As much as she loved Emma, yes, loved, there was no longer any way to deny that feeling. And as much as she cared for Matthew, her presence had become a point of discord that threatened family stability. Perhaps, with her withdrawal, Mrs. Eleanor would retreat in her more drastic plans, allowing Emma to remain with her father in Riverside. With a heavy heart, Rachel wrote a formal letter of resignation. She explained her professional reasons, emphasized Emma's progress, and recommended a gradual transition to another professional who could continue the work. She did not mention her personal feelings, nor Mrs. Eleanor's pressures. She maintained a strictly professional tone. Once the letter was completed, she placed it in an envelope along with a detailed report on Emma's development in recent weeks, including suggestions for continuing treatment. She intended to deliver everything to Matthew the following morning, before her determination wavered. What Rachel didn't expect was to find Matthew still awake, working in his office, when she went down to get a glass of water in the kitchen. "Can't sleep?" he asked, noticing her presence in the hallway. "Too much on my mind," admitted Rachel, stopping at the office door. She noticed that Matthew seemed equally tired, with visible dark circles and a loosened tie. Rare signs of dishevelment in a man, usually so impeccable. "That makes two of us, then. Please come in." Rachel hesitated, aware of the envelope in her hands, but ended up accepting the invitation. Matthew indicated a comfortable armchair in front of his desk. "My mother decided to return to Miami tomorrow," he announced without preamble. Apparently some unavoidable commitments suddenly arose. "Oh," Rachel couldn't disguise her surprise. "That's unexpected." "Not completely. We had a frank conversation after dinner. I explained that while I appreciate her concern for Emma, I cannot allow interference in decisions about my daughter's education and treatment." "How did she react?" "As expected. Offended, hurt, accusing me of ingratitude." Matthew gave a tired half smile. "But deep down I think she understood that this time I wouldn't yield. My mother has always been strategic. She knows when to retreat to rethink her approach." "Does that mean the threat of the guardianship process is suspended for now?" Dr. Mitchell convinced her that, given the current circumstances, especially Emma's recent progress, a judge would probably not look favorably on an attempt to separate the girl from her father. Rachel felt immense relief, soon followed by confusion. If the situation was resolving itself, did her decision to leave still make sense? "That's a positive development," she commented, choosing her words carefully. Matthew observed her for a few moments, as if trying to decipher something in her expression. "What's that?" he finally asked, indicating the envelope in her hands. Rachel hesitated. The scenario had changed, but the underlying issues remained. Her presence in the house could still generate comments, expectations, complications. "My letter of resignation," she finally responded, deciding on honesty. "I thought my withdrawal could help calm the situation with your mother." Matthew seemed genuinely shocked. "You were willing to give up working with Emma to protect her from my mother's maneuvers." "I would do anything for her well-being," Rachel responded simply. A dense silence established itself between them. Matthew stood up, walked around the desk, and sat in the armchair next to Rachel. "You really care about her, don't you? It's not just a professional case." "No," admitted Rachel. "Emma has become important to me. Very important." "And what about me?" asked Matthew, echoing the interrupted conversation from the night before. "Have I also become important to you?" The question hung in the air, loaded with possibilities. Rachel felt her heart accelerate, aware that they were at a decisive moment. "Yes," she finally responded, opting for the simple truth. "More than I probably should." Matthew reached for her hands, holding them with delicacy. "Did you know that I found the drawing Emma made of the three of us? She sees us as a family, Rachel. And for the first time since I lost Sarah, I allowed myself to imagine a future different from what I had planned." "Matthew, Urgent knocks on the door interrupted the moment. It was Mrs. Nancy, in a nightgown, and with a worried expression. "Excuse me, sir, but it's Emma." She woke up calling for Miss Rachel. Without hesitation, Rachel stood up and ran to the girls' room, with Matthew right behind. They found Emma sitting in bed, with wide eyes, clearly frightened after another nightmare. "I'm here." Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking the girl's hair. "Everything's all right now." "Rachel," repeated Emma, her voice still a fragile whisper but audible. "Stay." A single word, but one that carried a much bigger request. Matthew, standing at the door of the room, felt his eyes tear up upon hearing his daughter's voice again, a voice he had feared he would never hear again. "Stay with us," he complimented, verbalizing what Emma had expressed so simply. In that moment, looking at father and daughter, Rachel knew her decision was already made. The envelope with the resignation letter, forgotten in the office, no longer made sense. Her place was here, with this family that slowly and against all odds had also become hers. "I'll stay," she responded, feeling a deep certainty in her words. The days that followed brought significant changes to the Anderson mansion. Mrs. Eleanor departed as announced, not without first making extensive recommendations about the need for discretion and consideration for the family reputation. Matthew listened patiently, but remained firm in his decisions. Emma continued to surprise everyone with small but consistent progress. After the initial breakthrough, she began to pronounce isolated words, usually names: Daddy, Bella, Nancy. Each new word was celebrated as the victory it truly represented. Matthew reorganized his professional schedule, delegating more responsibilities to his directors to be able to spend more time at home. Saturday mornings became sacred. That was when the three had picnics in the garden, read stories together, or simply enjoyed each other's company. Rachel, in turn, adapted her role in the house. She continued to be Emma's caregiver and therapist, but now there was an open recognition of the effective bond that had formed between them. Matthew and she were advancing slowly in their relationship, respecting the time necessary for everyone to adjust to the new family dynamic. 3 months after Mrs. Eleanor's departure, on a sunny spring afternoon, Emma surprised everyone again. They were in the garden, Matthew trimming some plants, while Rachel helped Emma assemble a flower crown, when the girl suddenly raised her eyes and asked, in a complete sentence, "Are you going to get married?" The question, so direct and unexpected, left the adults momentarily speechless. Matthew looked at Rachel, who seemed equally surprised. "Well, Princess," Matthew began, carefully choosing his words, "that's something Rachel and I would need to talk about a lot before deciding." "But you like her," insisted Emma, with the simple and direct logic of children. "And she likes you, and I like you both." Rachel couldn't contain a smile at the girl's perfectly reasonable reasoning. "It's a bit more complicated than that, Emma," she explained gently. "But yes, I like your father very much, and I love you more than I can explain." "Mom would like you," Emma declared with surprising conviction. "She always said that the most important thing was for us to be happy." Matthew felt a lump in his throat upon hearing his daughter spontaneously mention her mother, another sign of her healthy processing of grief. "Your mother was very wise," he agreed, exchanging a significant look with Rachel. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Matthew and Rachel sat on the back porch contemplating the garden, illuminated by small decorative lights. "She's right, you know," commented Matthew, holding Rachel's hand between his. "About being happy, about what Sarah valued. Emma is processing everything in her own way. It's healthy that she can talk about her mother, integrate her into her new reality." "And what about us?" asked Matthew, turning to face her directly. "I think we also need to integrate our past into the new reality we're building." Rachel nodded, understanding the depth of those words. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah," she said softly. "Neither in Emma's heart, nor in yours, I know. And I think I finally understood what Sarah meant in that letter, about moving forward, about allowing new loves to enter our lives." Matthew took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for an important leap. "I don't know exactly how to answer Emma's question today. We're not ready for that step. There's still much to build, but I know that I want you in our lives, not just as Emma's caregiver, but as an integral part of this family we're redefining." Rachel felt tears in her eyes, not of sadness but of a deep and serene happiness. "I want that too," she responded simply. To be with you, to build something new, respecting what came before. Matthew leaned in and kissed her softly. Their first kiss, loaded with promises, possibilities, and a future that neither could have imagined months ago. In the room above them, Emma slept peacefully, hugging her doll Bella. On her bedside table, a new drawing showed 4 figures: herself, Matthew, Rachel, and above them, like a protective angel, Sarah. It was an unusual family, reconstructed from losses and encounters, from pain and healing, from silences and new words. The Anderson mansion, which months before had been a cold and silent place, was gradually filling with life again. In the mornings, Emma's voice could be heard practicing new words. During the day, music and laughter echoed through the corridors. At night, stories were shared, memories honored, and new dreams planned. It was a new beginning for everyone. Not a replacement for what had been lost, but a new chance to build something meaningful from the fragments left by pain. And in that garden, under the stars of Riverside, Matthew and Rachel sealed a silent commitment to care for that small family that destiny, in its mysterious ways, had united.